In this chapter or section of reading, pages 50 through 70, Kegan starts out with well, leaving off from the last 5 lamps in a room metaphor, where each lamp provides a source. It's individual, it's separate, it's like a well-balanced diet, but all of these parts or all of these lamps are connected to a similar electrical system or the source. So all of these things, although they are diverse and individual and separate and wonderful in their own ways, all have this co-conspirational power or co-conspiratorial power where they all express their common source. And so he likens this metaphor to a school or a place of education or institutionalization where a mission is achieved or identified that acknowledges the diversity of the sources or the lamps and their designs, but remains conscious of the common source of power that they all share a loyalty to. And so he starts out speaking of schools and schools of thought and teachers and how different ones teach. And so how do we achieve this development on a large scale? This idea that we all come from this common source that we are loyal to. So how do we achieve this with such a diverse individual group or group of individuals or a diverse body? Kegan argues that it is through the nitty-gritty operations. It's not any grand, large movement, but the small-scale influences and changes that we plug into or tap into the similar source. And so this includes this goes back to the back to basic and whole child teachers who each have the tools and abilities to essentially be good teachers, and they impart useful knowledge and skills respectively to their students, but they each have these different ways of going about it. So he talks a lot about teacher A, who is he talks about teacher A, who's the back to basics teacher, teaches kind of rote memorization and saying it back, very robotic learning, where the spouting of facts back, I guess you could say, in a really basic term, is emphasized, as opposed to teacher B, the whole child teacher, who's more concerned with the social capabilities of their students and how what they're learning, the basics of what they're learning, what those skills use, or how they're able to use those skills to impart more effectively to their social awareness or their social experience. And so the difference between the various versions, and then he splits up the teacher A and teacher B into a couple different scenarios and versions. And one that was most important was the different versions of teacher B. So it was teacher B and teacher B apostrophe. And the difference was that teacher B apostrophe achieves classroom motion apart from himself. He allows the engagement between students to teach social movement or social management rather than indulge himself in a kind of sermonic speech where he's just spouting idealistic notions to his students. Where each of us can agree that most of those things are probably going to go over their head and not be ingested and not be retained. So this method allows his students, teacher apostrophe B, and the method was that the students in their discussions, if one had something to refute or had something to argue back, they would have to repeat exactly and to that student's liking what the prior student had said. And if they didn't say it well or they said it in a sarcastic kind of tone, the other student could say, no, that's not right, say it again. So they would have to, this caused them to fully acknowledge the full argument of what had been said before them before they could go on. And so that has a really important and relevant social skill that ties into it. So this method allows them to step beyond their categorical thinking limit, what I think, which a lot of adolescents struggle with, taking concrete objects and concrete thoughts and making this abstract generalization. And this brings them to the cross-categorical behavior, or the ability to define, that we were talking about with Maddie being unable to do with his parents, or his parents wanting him to do, to think cross-categorically. So teacher B apostrophe differentiates himself from teachers A and B because he mobilizes his students' mind and supports growth internally rather than rote memorization and kind of forcing these listening skills. So this view on schooling and fostering a consciousness is important in social context because schooling acts as a culture or social arena where students can learn this type of societal application, have greater chances of understanding cross-categorical understanding, and appease the expectations that adults place on them. And so we talk a little bit about sexuality in adolescence and getting them to and our desire to want to change their behaviors, basically, and in a clean way of saying it, getting them to change their behavior tomorrow depends on how well we as adults or as future adults can change the way they think today. That we have to foster this internalization of new norms, not shove our ideas down their throats. And so, yeah.